One summer morning in 1967, I awoke to the sound of screaming. My platoon of US Marines had been patrolling the jungle outside of Kuchi, an area famous for tunnel systems and a heavy enemy presence. We suffered casualties from snipers, landmines, and even crude bamboo traps. But no Marine suffered a fate as terrible as Corporal Parkhill. His remains were unrecognizable. He'd been torn apart, eaten from the inside out. The Marine that had found him had to be evacuated an hour or so later. He'd gone rock happy, driven mad by the unspeakable horror that had greeted him that morning. Intercepts of Viet Cong communications led us to believe that an Indo-Chinese tiger was responsible. Translators determining that the references to a Kwaitu, or wild beast, must have been alluding to a rare but aggressive female that was prowling the area. Viet Cong elements had withdrawn from the area, apparently so terrified of the huntress that they either remained in their tunnels or pulled out altogether. We were tasked with pushing forward, then holding these areas to keep Charlie from returning. A week later, a quiet Marine from Donner Lake, California, shot the tiger whilst on firewatch. Private Reed posed for photos alongside the huge feline's corpse, his wide smile displaying how proud he was of being a Marine to take out the man-eater. But the killings didn't stop. Shortly after, another of our Marines got out of his fighting hole to take a piss during the night. He never returned. His remains, what little was left, was found on a riverbank nearby. Private Reed was sick with guilt. "I should have stopped this," I remember him saying, pale and shaking when he heard the news. I told him there was nothing he could have done, that the dangers in Vietnam weren't just a handful of insurgents in black pajamas. The jungle was out to kill us. This entire country wanted us dead. The Viet Cong returned to reclaim their territory, and with them came a sharp increase in the intensity of fighting. Countless ambushes, the crack and thump of bullets snapping overhead as my men crouched in muddy rice paddies. Yes, I'll never forget the incident in which an armoured personnel carrier ran over a landmine just outside the village of Diep Thien. Flame shot from the top hatch, the canned screams of the burning occupants making my blood run cold. I looked over at Private Reed, ready to bark some kind of order at him, but what I saw took my breath away. Reed had a look in his eye as the smell of cooking flesh wafted around his nostrils, and to my absolute horror, he was starting to drool. There was a savage beast in the jungle with us, alright, that hungered for the taste of human flesh. But it wasn't a tiger. It was never a tiger. My grandma was the sweetest woman anyone could have ever met. She was the kind of woman that would give you a piece of candy before bedtime, or take you to the toy store when your parents couldn't. To say we were sad when she passed would be a massive understatement. When I was a small kid, Grandma would never talk about my grandfather. In fact, if you brought him up when she was around, her attitude would completely change. She would become extremely antisocial, avoiding everyone, completely unlike her normal self. Then the next time you saw her, she would be completely fine. I didn't understand at the time that this behavior was because my grandpa went missing, but I was a small kid, so what do you expect? Along with this strange behavior, my grandma would always keep the basement door locked, and when I asked her about it, she would just tell me that the basement was forbidden. Strictly forbidden. I'd always wondered what was down there for most of my childhood, especially since whenever I had gone down there, she would always pull me away. Or if I brought it up in a conversation, she would always change up the subject. I just chalked this up to her strange behavior, but I was never really sure. I was always a very mischievous person, which is why when I was 13, I stole the basement key from out of her purse when she was sleeping. I crept down to the basement, trying to be very quiet, and I let out a sigh of relief when I made it. A wave of anxiety had left my body, but thinking about what could be in the basement made a whole other wave of anxiety and even nervousness flood my body. Slowly, I turned the key. The basement was dark, musty, and damp. It had a strange odor to it, adding to how dirty the basement felt. There was a pull string light at the bottom of the steps that, when pulled, illuminated the room in a dim and eerie light. It was full of dusty boxes and various items that would be mostly expected in the basement. Except for one thing. In the corner was an armoire, which was completely clean, which made it stand out like a sore thumb. When I inspected it was full of medals and other war mementos. It also had a large brown diary in it. When I picked it up, it read, "Property of Private John Miller, 82nd Airborne Division." "My grandfather's diary?" I said out loud. I contemplated putting it back in the armoire, but I just couldn't help but wonder what was in it. Looking back on this now, I wish that I would have put it back and forgot all about it. Ever heard the phrase, "curiosity killed a cat"? Well, this applies here better than anything. This is what I read. March 23rd, 1968. Myself and a few men from my unit have been ordered to drop behind enemy lines and assassinate someone of importance to the Viet Cong. They didn't give us a lot of details. They didn't even tell us who we were supposed to take out. I guess they're worried about spies, and if they are this worried, this man must be of extreme importance to the Viet Cong. They will give us more details via radio and on a scrambled frequency. March 24th, 1968. We dropped last night at 2:40 a.m. in the middle of the jungle. The military had supplied us with AK-47s and various clothing items to blend in with the locals. However, we are also equipped with standard-issue US military rifles and uniforms. The nearest village was about 4 clicks to the northwest, so we started walking. We got there almost 7 hours later at 8:56 a.m. It was extremely hard to navigate through the thick foliage in the black of night. While it was still dark, I could have sworn I heard the sounds of us being followed by something. An animal, maybe? Since we weren't given any flashlights to avoid detection, I had no idea what it was. We arrived at the village and found a place to stay. March 6th, 1968. HQ finally radioed back, and in record time too. 2 days. Now, if you'll please excuse my sarcasm, they told us that the target was almost 25 miles to the north. I don't know why they couldn't have dropped us closer to the spot, but I digress. Like I said, navigation through the middle of a jungle is a seriously time-consuming process. March 27th, 1968. I don't like this jungle. I feel like I'm being watched. My squad mates keep telling me it's an animal, but I'm not quite sure. What kind of animal stalks 4 people for 6 hours? It doesn't help that the locals are superstitious either. They kept telling stories about some terrible supernatural beings. I don't know, maybe I'm just being paranoid. March 28th. Our progress has been halted. Seriously halted. Mark broke his leg after he slipped on a wet rock and landed on his foot weird. We've had a lot of bad luck since last night. Our compasses broke mysteriously, none of us can figure out why, and it's not just my compass, it's all of our compasses. Sergeant's map just seems to have disappeared out of nowhere. We contemplated leaving Mark behind, but that would make us no better than those commies that call themselves the Viet Cong. We have no choice but to set up a camp and wait till Mark's leg gets a bit better. March 29th. Today I was scouting when I stumbled upon something disturbing. There I was, just walking through the jungle, when I stumbled upon a tree with a pentagram carved in it, and above the symbol was the head of a goat stuck into one of the branches. Needless to say, I got out of there fast, and just when I got back to camp, Mark was gone. I asked Sergeant about it, but he had no recollection of Mark even getting up and coming out of the makeshift tent that we made for him. It's like he never even existed. None of us knew what to do. What if the Viet Cong found our camp and dragged Mark into the jungle and slit his throat? We wanted to move our camp, but what if he came back? What if the Viet Cong didn't find us? We decided to stay the night, but have one of us stay up for half the night until the other guy takes over. If any commies come in the middle of the night, we would scream for the guys to wake up. Come morning, Mark doesn't come back, and no soldiers came to slit our throats. We decided to leave our camp behind, but take anything of importance with us. March 30th. I'm starting to lose hope of getting out of Vietnam. Mark is probably dead, and now it's just me, the sergeant, and Tony. We're starting to run low on MREs, and we decided to begin rationing our foods. Now that our compass is broke and we lost our map, our means of navigation have been disabled. We have to use the stars to navigate. Also, I keep seeing things in my peripheral vision. This jungle's getting to me. Or is it? I think Sergeant sees it too. He's been acting very strangely throughout the past few hours. It seems like he just goes blank for minutes on end, just staring into nothing. Every once in a while he'll turn his head to look back at Tony, but there's something in his eyes. Something's wrong. March 31st. The sergeant just killed Tony. No context at all, just aimed his M14 rifle at him and fired a round into his skull. I took off running as fast as my legs would carry, but not without Sergeant unloading an entire magazine into my direction. None of the bullets actually hit me, but one grazed me. I'm bleeding slightly, but it's not too bad. I'm writing this from a small camp that I set up. I made a tent using the Vietnamese clothing supplied to us by the military, and some sticks. There's no way I'm getting out of this. I don't have a radio, and I just realized that there's someone standing outside my tent. It's not my sergeant. It looks somewhat like a human, but its shadow is demented. It has extremely long fingers, and it's tall. I can't say how tall, but it looks like it's almost 7 feet tall. I'm going to make a break for it. It's been 4 hours since that thing started following me. It's stalking me. I think I lost it, and I'm now hiding in a tree. The writing just stopped. I was expecting him to write and say that everything was fine, but there was nothing. So that's when I turned the page. I expected nothing, but I could never have expected what happened next. Written in blood were the words, "He is the Moonlight Man." I threw the book back into the armoire and ran up the stairs faster than I ever have in my life. Upstairs, my grandmother was sitting in a chair in the kitchen. I tried to speak to her, but no words came out of her mouth. And that's when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed, IVs and all sorts of different tubes sticking into my body. I was in there for what was probably 5 minutes, but with how badly my mind was spinning, it felt like 5 hours. A doctor and some of my family members entered the room. After a few seconds of worried chattering from my family and the doctor, my mother spoke up. She told me that she had come to pick me up from my grandmother's house, and after ringing the doorbell repeatedly with no answer, opened the door and entered the house. After looking for me or my grandmother, she finally entered the kitchen to the sight of me unconscious on the floor, and my dead grandmother slumped over in her chair. She died of a heart attack. After she brought me to the hospital, They discovered that I was severely hydrated and lacking nutrition, along with several bodily fluids such as blood. But the weird thing was that I wasn't bleeding anywhere. That was 14 years ago. I'm now typing this from my computer after I finally gathered enough courage to go back to her house and retrieve the diary. That's how I could type those entries word for word. I think that by opening the journal, I unleashed something hellish, something demonic. Everywhere I go, I feel like I'm being watched. Hell, I can't even sleep anymore. I'm going outside, and I'm gonna burn this journal.